I was watering my roses when I heard the car door slam. My son Bradley stood in my driveway, after 3 years of silence, a woman beside him. He walked past me without a greeting, surveying my villa like a real estate agent. His wife hung back, arms crossed, appraising everything. Then Bradley turned to me with that smile I remembered too well. "Perfect," he said. "Crystal will love living here. We'll move in next month." I smiled back and pulled out my phone. Bradley's face held that same expectant look I remembered from his childhood, when he'd ask for something and simply assume I'd hand it over. Crystal stepped forward from behind him, and I noticed how her eyes traveled across my porch, taking in the hanging baskets of petunias I'd planted, the wicker furniture I'd saved 3 months to buy, the welcome mat I'd chosen, because it reminded me of new beginnings. "You've done well for yourself," Bradley said, but his tone suggested surprise, maybe even disappointment. Quite an upgrade from that place above the laundromat. The mention of that apartment sent a cold wave through my chest. He'd seen it only once, 3 years ago, when I'd called him desperate and broken. He'd stayed 15 minutes. Crystal moved closer, her hand already on my front door handle. "Mind if I look inside? Bradley's told me so much about your decorating taste." She didn't wait for an answer. The door swung open, and she disappeared into my home. I turned to Bradley. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting my mother." "Is that a crime?" He moved toward one of my porch chairs and sat down as though he belonged there. "Actually, I've been thinking. You're getting older, living alone in this big house. Crystal and I have been looking for more space. This place is perfect. 4 bedrooms, that gorgeous kitchen, the yard. We could really use it." My hands tightened on the watering can. "This is my home, Bradley." I know. But think practically. You don't need all this space. And honestly, can you really afford it? The mortgage on a place like this must be crushing. You were barely scraping by 3 years ago. I'm just concerned, that's all. Family looks out for family, right? Family. The word tasted bitter. I thought about the last 3 years, how I'd called him on my 64th birthday and he'd let it go to voicemail. How I'd sent Christmas cards that went unanswered. How I'd driven past his condo in Portland once, hoping to see him, but lost my nerve and turned around. "I can afford my home just fine," I said quietly. He pulled papers from his jacket pocket, unfolding them with deliberate slowness. "Actually, I've been looking into this. Did you know that when Dad died, I was named as your financial guardian? In case you became unable to manage things during your grief. It's all legal. I talked to our family lawyer." I stared at the documents he held out. They looked official, stamped and notarized. My heart started pounding. "What are you talking about? I never signed anything like that. You were in shock when Dad died. Don't you remember? The lawyer came to the house. You signed a bunch of papers. This was one of them." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just want what's best. And what's best is keeping this place in the family. Crystal and I move in. You can stay in the guest room if you want. Or we can find you a nice assisted living place." My throat went dry. Assisted living? Bradley, I'm 67 years old. I work full-time. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Are you, though? He leaned back in my chair, crossing his legs. Living alone, managing a property this size, dealing with mortgage payments. It's a lot of stress. Stress isn't good at your age. I'm just thinking of your health. From inside, I heard Crystal on the phone. Her voice carried through the open door. "Yes, the master bedroom has that bay window I told you about. The closet is huge. We'll need to repaint, obviously, but the bones are good." Something snapped inside me. I walked to the door. "Crystal, you need to leave. Now." She glanced at me, phone still pressed to her ear. "Just give me a minute. I'm talking to our interior designer. Get out of my house." Bradley stood up behind me. "Mom, there's no need to be rude. Crystal's just excited. We all are. This is going to be great for everyone." I turned to face him fully. "You abandoned me. 3 years ago, when Dad died and I lost everything, you gave me $200 and disappeared. I didn't hear from you on my birthday, on Thanksgiving, on Christmas. I was cleaning office buildings at night and eating 1 meal a day to save money, and you couldn't even return my calls. Now you show up here demanding my home?" His expression didn't change. I had my own life, my own problems. And honestly, Dad left you in a mess. That wasn't my fault. The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. I thought about Gerald, my husband of 37 years, who died of a massive heart attack while fixing the sink. How I'd found him on the kitchen floor, already gone. How the world had shattered in that moment. The weeks after were a blur of grief and confusion. I'd discovered that Gerald had handled everything, all our finances, all our plans. I'd trusted him completely. And then Frank Sutton, Gerald's business partner, had shown up at my door with documents claiming Gerald owed him enormous sums, debts from the business, money that needed to be repaid immediately. I'd been forced to sell Gerald's truck, his tools, our furniture. We'd lived in a rental home for 37 years, so there was no property to sell. Our savings account had less than $8,000. It vanished within weeks, swallowed by debts I didn't understand and funeral costs I couldn't avoid. That's when I'd called Bradley. My only child. The son I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for. He'd driven down from Portland, looked at the papers Frank had brought, and shaken his head. Dad really screwed up, didn't he? I'd asked if I could stay with him and Crystal just for a little while, just until I got on my feet. He'd shifted uncomfortably. Said their condo was small. Said Crystal wasn't comfortable with house guests. Said he'd help me find a place. He'd given me $200 in cash and left. I'd used it for first month's rent on that studio apartment above the laundromat. The walls were so thin I could hear every conversation from the units around me. The bathroom had mold in the corners, but it was shelter. I'd taken the job cleaning offices at night because it was the only work I could find that didn't require computer skills I didn't have. 64 years old, mopping floors and emptying trash cans from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. My back ached constantly. My knees swelled, but I needed money. I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for weeks at a time, wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, walked everywhere to save bus fare. Every penny went into a savings account, a desperate attempt to build something, anything, for the future. 8 months in, Bradley had called. His voice had been friendly, casual. He'd asked how I was doing. I'd been so grateful to hear from him that I'd nearly cried. We'd talked for 5 minutes before he'd gotten to his real reason for calling. He needed $5,000, a business opportunity. He'd pay me back within 2 months. I'd told him I had $400 to my name. There'd been a long silence. Then he'd laughed. Actually laughed. Guess we're both broke then. Talk later, Mom. That was the last time I'd heard his voice, until today. But I hadn't given up. I'd enrolled in bookkeeping courses at the community college, using financial aid for students over 60. I'd studied between shifts, my textbooks propped on the bus on my way to work. 6 months later, I'd gotten a job at a small accounting firm. Better hours, better pay, health insurance. I'd saved every extra dollar for 2.5 years. Lived in that same terrible apartment. Ate cheaply. Bought nothing I didn't absolutely need. And 6 months ago, I'd walked into a bank and qualified for a mortgage. This villa had been a foreclosure, needing work, but mine. I'd signed the papers with tears streaming down my face. Now Bradley sat on my porch, papers in hand, telling me it should be his. Crystal emerged from inside, still on her phone. The kitchen needs updating, but that's easy enough. We can knock out that wall between the dining room and living room, make it open concept. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Both of you, get off my property right now. Bradley stood slowly, carefully folding his papers. You're not thinking clearly. That's okay. I understand. This is a big change. But the paperwork is already filed. The court will review it. I'm just trying to make this easy for you. Court? What are you talking about? He smiled that cold smile again. I filed preliminary paperwork with the county 3 days ago. Seeking conservatorship. I have documentation of your erratic behavior, your poor financial decisions. At your age, living alone, it's just not safe. The court agrees. There's a hearing in 17 days. My stomach dropped. You're lying. I'm protecting you, whether you realize it or not. He pulled an envelope from his other pocket and set it on the porch table. You'll be served officially tomorrow. Save yourself the embarrassment and just sign the trust papers. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Crystal walked past me without a word, heading to their car. Bradley followed, then turned back. "I'll see you in court, Mom. Try not to worry too much. Stress is bad for your health." They drove away. I stood frozen on my porch, the envelope staring at me like a threat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. Inside were legal documents. Petition for conservatorship. The words swam before my eyes. Bradley Thornton, seeking full legal control over the finances and property of Angelita Thornton. Due to concerns regarding mental capacity, judgment, and ability to manage personal affairs. I flipped through the pages, my heart sinking with each one. Statements from two doctors, Dr. Helen Morrison and Dr. Patrick Walsh. Both claimed they'd evaluated me. Both cited signs of cognitive decline, poor judgment, inability to manage daily affairs. I'd never met either doctor, never been to their offices, never spoken to them. The signatures looked real. The documents looked official. But they were lies. All lies. There were also bank statements attached. My bank statements. Showing my accounts, my balance, my mortgage payment. How did he get these? How did he access my private financial information? The hearing date was typed at the bottom. November 23rd. 17 days away. I sank into the chair Bradley had been sitting in. My mind raced. I'd heard about cases like this. Adult children who took control of their aging parents' finances and assets through conservatorships. Elder abuse, they called it. It happened more often than people realized. And now it was happening to me. The process server arrived at 6:45 the next morning. I was still in my nightgown, having barely slept. He handed me the official papers and asked me to sign confirming receipt. My signature came out shaky and wrong. As soon as he left, I called law offices. The first 3 couldn't take a case on such short notice. The 4th had a cancellation. Timothy Grant, attorney at law, could see me at 2 p.m. I went to work in a daze. My supervisor at the accounting firm, a kind woman named Beth Carson, noticed immediately. She pulled me aside during lunch and asked if everything was okay. I found myself telling her everything, the words tumbling out. She listened with growing alarm, then wrote down the name of the lawyer she'd used for her mother's estate. "But I already have an appointment with someone," I said. "Keep it. But be careful. Make sure they're really on your side. These cases can get ugly." I didn't understand what she meant until I sat in Timothy Grant's office later that afternoon. He was about 50, with an expensive suit and a firm handshake. His office had leather furniture and diplomas from a good law school on the wall. I showed him everything. The petition, the fake doctor statements, the timeline of Bradley's abandonment and sudden return. Timothy read through it all, his expression growing more serious. "These cases are tricky," he said finally. "Conservatorship abuse is real, but courts take mental health concerns seriously. They have to. The system is designed to protect vulnerable adults. But I'm not vulnerable, and those doctors never evaluated me. The signatures must be forged. That's a serious criminal allegation. We'd need proof." He leaned back in his chair. "Here's what we need to do. First, we build your defense. Show you're competent, capable, and not in need of any conservatorship. Second, we challenge the legitimacy of these medical evaluations. Third, we establish a pattern of financial abuse and manipulation by your son." Hope flickered in my chest. Can we do that? Can we stop him? It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap. My retainer for a case like this is $3,000. That covers initial filings and the first hearing. If it goes beyond that, we'll need to discuss additional fees. $3,000, nearly everything I had in savings. But what choice did I have? I wrote the check with a shaking hand. Over the next week, I met with Timothy 3 times. He asked for all my medical records, bank statements, employment records, anything that could prove my competency. I brought everything. He seemed to be working on the case, filing responses with the court, preparing documents. Then came the phone call. That changed everything. I'd called Timothy's office to discuss our strategy for the hearing, which was now just 9 days away. His secretary answered, "He's at lunch right now. Let me take a message. Do you know when he'll be back?" "Should be around 1:30. He's meeting with Bradley, so it might run a bit long." My blood went cold. "Bradley who?" There was a pause. I could hear the moment she realized her mistake. "Oh, A different Bradley. Not Bradley Thornton? My son? I really shouldn't. I need to let you go, Mrs. Thornton. She hung up. I sat staring at my phone, my mind reeling. Timothy was having lunch with Bradley, my lawyer, the man I'd paid $3,000 to defend me. Having lunch with the son who was trying to steal my home. I called back immediately. The secretary wouldn't put me through. I drove to Timothy's office and waited in the parking lot. At 1:45, a car pulled in. Timothy got out, laughing at something. From the passenger seat emerged Bradley. They shook hands. Bradley clapped Timothy on the shoulder. Then they both went inside through different doors. I sat in my car, shaking with rage and disbelief. When Timothy's secretary left for the day at 5, I walked in and demanded to see him. He looked surprised to see me. Angelita, we have an appointment tomorrow afternoon. Is everything okay? You're friends with Bradley. His expression shifted slightly. I know your son, yes. We went to college together. But that doesn't affect my ability to represent you professionally. You were at lunch with him today. That was personal. We're members of the same athletic club. You're feeding him information about my case. I heard my voice rising but couldn't control it. Everything I told you, he knows. How else would he know to file that emergency motion? What emergency motion? But his eyes flickered, just for a second. I'd hit on something. I didn't even know about any emergency motion, but I'd guessed right. Timothy knew things he shouldn't. I'm firing you, I said. I want my retainer back. You signed a contract. I've done work on your case. I'm entitled to keep the retainer for services rendered. You're a fraud. You've been working with Bradley from the start. His professional mask slipped. Be very careful about making accusations you can't prove, Mrs. Thornton. That kind of paranoid thinking won't help your case. Paranoid thinking. The same phrase Crystal had used in her fake evaluation. I realized then that Timothy had probably fed them that language. I left his office without another word. I had no money for a new lawyer, no time to find one anyway. The hearing was 9 days away, and now Bradley knew every detail of my defense strategy. When I got home that evening, there was a notice taped to my door. From my bank. My account had been frozen, pending the conservatorship hearing. A temporary restraining order on my assets. I couldn't access anything over $500 without court approval. Bradley had somehow gotten a judge to freeze my money. I had $300 in cash hidden in my bedroom. That was all I had to survive on until the hearing. I went inside and locked the door behind me. The villa that had represented my independence, my triumph over poverty and abandonment, suddenly felt fragile, like something that could be taken away at any moment. Because it could. In 9 days, I could lose everything. The preliminary hearing was on a gray Wednesday morning. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper. I'd spent every evening for the past week at the public library, printing documents, researching conservatorship law, preparing my defense. I'd spoken with a paralegal at a legal aid clinic who'd given me basic guidance on how to represent myself. But walking into that courtroom alone, seeing Bradley sitting at the other table with a polished female attorney, seeing Crystal in the gallery dressed like she was going to church, I felt the full weight of how outmatched I was. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Martha Hendricks. She had kind eyes but a no-nonsense expression. She reviewed the case file while we waited, making notes. Bradley's attorney, Paula Garrett, presented first. She was everything I wasn't. Confident, articulate, organized. She laid out the case methodically. Your Honor, Bradley Thornton is a concerned son seeking to protect his aging mother from financial exploitation and potential harm. Mrs. Angelita Thornton is 67 years old, living alone, with documented evidence of cognitive decline and poor decision-making. She submitted the statements from the 2 doctors I'd never met. She presented a timeline of my erratic behavior, including buying a house I allegedly couldn't afford. She painted Bradley as a devoted son doing his painful duty. Then Judge Hendricks looked at me. Mrs. Thornton, you're representing yourself? Yes, Your Honor. I couldn't afford an attorney. I stood, my prepared notes in hand. My voice shook, but I pushed through. These allegations are false. I've never met the doctors who supposedly evaluated me. Those signatures have to be forgeries. I'm employed full-time at Mason & Associates Accounting. I have excellent performance reviews. I can afford my mortgage. My budget is sound. I submitted my employment records, my mortgage documents, my detailed budget showing income and expenses. I explained how Bradley had abandoned me 3 years ago and only returned when I had something worth taking. Judge Hendricks listened, reading through my materials, but I could see doubt in her expression. Bradley had an attorney. I had printouts from the library. Then Paula Garrett said, "Your Honor, we'd like to call a witness, Crystal Thornton." Crystal took the stand, was sworn in. Paula walked her through basic questions, establishing her identity. Then came the revelation that gutted me. "Mrs. Thornton, what is your profession?" "I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work with elderly clients, assessing their needs and living situations." A social worker. Crystal wasn't just Bradley's wife. She had professional credentials in elder care. My stomach dropped. "And did you have occasion to observe Angelita Thornton recently?" "Yes. My husband and I visited her 2 weeks ago at her home. Can you describe what you observed?" Crystal's voice was calm, professional. I observed several concerning behaviors. Mrs. Thornton seemed confused about dates. She claimed she hadn't invited us to visit, though Bradley had confirmed the appointment with her by phone the day before. The house was cluttered and disorganized. Papers everywhere, unwashed dishes in the sink. She seemed agitated when we arrived, paranoid even. She accused us of trying to steal from her, when we were simply concerned family members, checking on her welfare. None of this was true. My house had been clean. I hadn't invited them. Bradley had shown up unannounced. But Crystal's credentials made her believable. "Did you conduct a formal evaluation?" "Not formally, no. But as a social worker, I'm trained to recognize warning signs. I observed memory confusion, agitation, paranoid thinking, and an inability to maintain her living environment." I wanted to scream, but I knew that would only make me look unstable. I forced myself to stay calm. When it was my turn to question her, I tried. "Why didn't you tell me you were evaluating me?" "I wasn't conducting a formal evaluation. I was just concerned as family. But you just testified to observing clinical symptoms. As a social worker, I can't turn off my training. I notice things. You said my house was disorganized. It wasn't. You said I seemed confused about dates. I wasn't. You're lying. Mrs. Thornton, I understand this is difficult for you, but I have no reason to lie. I'm simply reporting what I saw." It was her word against mine. And she had the credentials. Then Paula Garrett dropped the next bomb. "Your Honor, we have one more witness. Frank Sutton." Frank walked in, and I felt 3 years of suppressed anger surge up. He was the man who'd claimed Gerald owed him money. The man who'd forced me to sell everything. He'd taken advantage of my grief and confusion to steal from me. And now he was here, testifying for Bradley. Frank was sworn in. Paula established that he'd been Gerald's business partner for 15 years, that he'd known me throughout that time. "Mr. Sutton, can you speak to Mrs. Thornton's mental state, both before and after her husband's death?" "I can. Look, I hate to say this, but even when Gerald was alive, Angelita was scattered. Gerald handled everything because she couldn't. The finances, the business decisions, even basic household management. He protected her. After he died, I saw her completely fall apart. She couldn't understand basic financial documents. Made wild accusations. Claimed I was stealing from her when I was just trying to settle Gerald's legitimate business debts. "Lies," I said, standing up. "You stole from Gerald's business. You forced me to sell everything to cover debts that didn't exist." Judge Hendricks frowned at me. "Mrs. Thornton, please sit down. You'll have a chance to respond." But I couldn't respond effectively. I had no proof of Frank's fraud, just my word against his. And he sounded so reasonable, so concerned. Paula Garrett concluded her case. "Your Honor, we have 2 medical professionals who evaluated Mrs. Thornton and found concerning symptoms. We have a licensed social worker who observed troubling behaviors. We have a longtime family friend who can attest to ongoing issues. We have evidence of impulsive financial decisions. Bradley Thornton is simply trying to protect his mother from harm and exploitation." Judge Hendricks looked at me. "Mrs. Thornton, I've reviewed everything presented today. I want to be clear that I'm not making a final determination at this time. However, I am concerned by what I've heard. I'm granting a temporary conservatorship pending a full evaluation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Bradley Thornton will be appointed temporary conservator for 45 days. During that time, Mrs. Thornton cannot sell property or access accounts over $500 without written approval. A court-appointed psychologist will conduct a thorough evaluation. We'll reconvene for a final hearing in 45 days. I tried to speak, but no words came out. Bradley was smiling, not obviously, just a slight upturn at the corners of his mouth. Judge Hendricks continued, "Mr. Thornton, you understand this is a serious responsibility? You're to act in your mother's best interests at all times." "Of course, Your Honor. I only want what's best for her." The gavel came down. I sat frozen as the courtroom emptied. Paula Garrett handed me a stack of papers outlining the terms of the temporary conservatorship. Bradley paused next to my table. "This is for your own good, Mom. You'll see that eventually." I drove home in a fog. When I pulled into my driveway, Bradley's car was already there. He was standing on the porch with a man in a uniform. A locksmith. "What are you doing?" Bradley held up the court papers. "As your temporary conservator, I have the right to secure the property. I'm having new locks installed. You'll get a key, of course. But I need to be able to access the house to make sure everything's being maintained properly." The locksmith looked uncomfortable but kept working. Within 20 minutes, my locks were changed. Bradley and Crystal went inside, and I heard them walking through rooms, opening closets, talking about organization and safety concerns. When they came back out, Crystal was carrying 2 of my photo albums. "Just taking some family pictures," she said, "for safekeeping." They left an hour later. Crystal smiled at me as they drove away. Bradley called back through the window, "We'll be staying in the guest room starting tomorrow, just to make sure you're okay." They were moving into my house, into the home I'd worked so hard for, and there was nothing I could do about it. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom and cried for the first time since Gerald's funeral. I'd survived poverty and abandonment and loneliness. I'd rebuilt my life from nothing. And now Bradley was taking it all away, piece by piece, hiding behind the law while he did it. 3 days after the hearing, Bradley and Crystal moved into my villa. Not just staying in the guest room, as Bradley had said. They moved into my master bedroom, took it over completely. Crystal rearranged everything, threw out my bedding, brought in her own furniture. I was moved to the smallest guest room, the one that had been my sewing room. My clothes crammed into a closet a third the size of my old one. My belongings reduced to what would fit in one room. "It's more practical this way," Crystal explained as she supervised movers bringing in their furniture. "The master suite is bigger. You don't need all that space." I watched strangers carry my dresser out of my own bedroom. Bradley directed them where to put things, completely comfortable in his role as the person in charge. When I protested, he showed me the court order. As temporary conservator, he had authority over the household. Living with them was a special kind of torture. Crystal cooked in my kitchen, throwing out my groceries because they weren't healthy. She invited friends over and introduced me as Bradley's mom who's staying with us. The humiliation burned. Bradley gave me a weekly allowance. $50. My own money doled out like I was a child. If I needed anything more, I had to ask permission. When I told him I needed to buy new shoes, he examined my current ones and said they were fine. I couldn't see my bank statements, couldn't access my accounts, couldn't make my own decisions. I was a prisoner in my own home. The appointment with Dr. Raymond Price, the court-appointed psychologist, was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Bradley insisted on driving me, but I refused. I used some of my allowance money for the bus, needing that one small act of independence. Dr. Price's office was in a professional building 40 minutes away. He was about 60, with gray hair and a kind face. The evaluation started with standard cognitive tests: memory, problem-solving, daily living skills. I answered everything correctly, feeling more confident with each question. Then came the interview portion. Dr. Price asked about my living situation, my relationship with Bradley. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The abandonment, the sudden return, the court case. I told him I believed Bradley was manipulating the system to steal my property. Dr. Price took notes. "Do you feel your son is trying to hurt you?" "Yes. Financially and emotionally." He wrote something down. I couldn't see what. Then he pulled out a document. I received background materials from a social worker, Crystal Thornton. She's provided quite a detailed report about concerning behaviors she's observed. He showed me the report. It was 10 pages long. Crystal had documented incident after incident, claimed I'd forgotten conversations, accused her of stealing things that were never missing, wandered around the house at night confused, forgot to eat meals. Each entry was dated, detailed, professional-looking. None of it had happened. "These incidents," Dr. Price said gently, "do you remember them? They didn't happen. She's making it all up." He wrote something else. "It's not uncommon for patients to not remember behaviors that concern family members. The brain can protect us from acknowledging troubling symptoms." "I'm not forgetting. She's lying. This is part of Bradley's plan to take my house." "Do you often feel people are conspiring against you?" I realized my mistake immediately. Talking about plans and conspiracies made me sound paranoid, but it wasn't paranoia if it was true. I'm not paranoid. I'm being abused. I understand you feel that way. His tone was sympathetic, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Let's continue with the evaluation. By the time I left his office, I knew I'd made things worse. Every time I tried to defend myself, I sounded exactly like the unstable person they were claiming I was. I took the bus home, exhaustion settling into my bones. When I walked through the front door, Bradley was at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. My financial documents, bank statements, tax returns, mortgage papers. "What are you doing?" "Reviewing your spending patterns. As conservator, I need to understand where your money's been going." I moved closer and saw something that made my heart stop. Bank statements showing large withdrawals. $4,000 on October 8th, $6,000 on October 12th, $3,000 on October 19th. I didn't make these withdrawals. Bradley looked up. "These are your accounts. Your signature is on the withdrawal slips." He slid the slips across the table. The signatures looked like mine, but I'd never signed them. I'd never even been to the bank on those dates. I'd been at work. "These are forged." "Mom, you're saying you don't remember going to the bank and withdrawing your own money?" "I didn't go to the bank. Someone forged my signature." His hand moved to his phone. He started recording. "Mom, you're accusing me of fraud. Do you realize how serious that is? Because you're committing fraud." My voice was too loud, too emotional. Exactly what they'd described in Crystal's report. This is exactly what Crystal documented, the paranoid accusations. He kept the phone steady, recording every word. "Do you remember going to the bank on October 8th? "I didn't go to the bank." "The date is right here, October 8th. You withdrew $4,000. "That's not my signature." "It looks exactly like your signature. Are you saying you have no memory of this?" I tried to grab the papers. He pulled them away, still recording. "I'm going to show this video to Dr. Price. He needs to see these episodes." I stepped back, realizing I'd walked into his trap. Everything I said to defend myself became evidence of instability. If I was calm, I was in denial. If I was angry, I was emotionally volatile. If I accused him, I was paranoid. There was no way to win. After he went upstairs, I used the house phone to call the police. I'd read about elder financial abuse. This was exactly that. The police had to help. 2 officers arrived within an hour. Officer Janet Williams and Officer David Porter. Both looked young, probably in their 30s. I explained everything. The forged signatures, the stolen money, the conspiracy to take my home. Bradley came down the stairs, his expression concerned and sad. He greeted the officers respectfully, showed them his court order establishing him as temporary conservator. "Officers, I'm sorry you had to come out here. My mother's been having some difficulties. Memory issues, paranoid thinking. She's confused about her own financial transactions." He showed them the video he'd just recorded of me becoming upset. Showed them Crystal's professional report documenting concerning behaviors. Showed them the withdrawal slips, with signatures that did look like mine. Officer Williams looked at me with sympathy. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter. There's a court order in place. If you believe there's fraud, you need to address that in court, not through us." "But he's stealing from me," Officer Porter added gently. "Your son has legal authority over your finances right now. That's what the court ordered. If you disagree with that, you need to talk to a lawyer." I don't have a lawyer. I can't afford one. He's controlling all my money. The officers exchanged glances. They could see the impossible situation but couldn't intervene. The law was on Bradley's side, at least temporarily. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table feeling more helpless than I'd ever felt in my life. Bradley had created the perfect trap. The system designed to protect vulnerable elders was being used to abuse me. Every action I took to defend myself was twisted into evidence of incompetence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the small guest bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 41 days I had left until the final hearing. 41 days to somehow prove my competency while living under Bradley's control. 41 days to stop him from stealing everything I'd worked for. But I had no money, no lawyer, no proof of the forgeries. Bradley controlled my finances, my home, my life. And with every day that passed, he was draining my accounts and building his case that I was incompetent. I'd survived poverty before. I'd rebuilt from nothing once. But I'd been younger then, stronger, with more hope. Now I was 67 years old, trapped in my own home, watching my son systematically destroy everything I'd built. For the first time, I wondered if I could actually lose this fight. 28 days into the temporary conservatorship, I'd lost count of how much Bradley had stolen. The statements I managed to glimpse showed $12,000 gone from my accounts. He claimed it was for expenses and property maintenance. I had no way to prove otherwise. Crystal had redecorated the entire villa. My furniture was gone, replaced with hers. My photographs were packed in boxes in the garage. She'd painted over the soft yellow walls I'd chosen with stark gray. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. One afternoon, a realtor arrived. Bradley gave her a tour while I listened from my room, hands clenched. I heard them discussing listing price, market conditions, expected sale time frame. They were planning to sell my home out from under me. I couldn't stay in that house anymore, even for an hour. I went for a walk, needing air, needing space from the suffocation of Bradley's presence. The neighborhood was quiet, trees lining the streets, houses similar to mine with well-kept yards. Angelita? I turned. My neighbor George Patterson stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand. He was about 70, a widower who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. We'd spoken a few times since I'd moved in, pleasantries about weather and gardening. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You look upset." Something about his kindness, the simple concern in his voice, broke through my defenses. I walked over to his porch, and the whole story poured out. Gerald's death, Bradley's abandonment, the lawsuit, the temporary conservatorship. Everything. George listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I've noticed a lot of activity at your house, strangers coming and going. I didn't realize what was happening." He set down his coffee cup. "Angelita, I might have something that can help you." He led me inside his house into a small office. On the wall was a monitor showing multiple camera feeds. I installed a security system 2 years ago after someone broke into my garage. One of the cameras covers my driveway and front yard, but because of the angle, he pulled up recorded footage. It also captures your driveway and front porch. My heart started racing. "You have video of my house?" "I have 2 years of footage." "Continuous recording," he started scrolling through dates. "What day did your son first show up?" I told him. He found the footage. There on the screen was Bradley's car pulling up, Bradley and Crystal getting out, Bradley walking past me without greeting, Crystal measuring rooms while on her phone. The audio wasn't perfect, but you could hear the threatening tone in Bradley's voice when he mentioned taking over my house. "Can you make copies of this?" "I can copy anything you need." He kept scrolling through dates. "What else should I look for?" 4 days ago, October 19th, around 2 in the afternoon. He found it. The footage showed Bradley leaving my house with papers in his hand. He went to his car, parked in my driveway, and looked around carefully to make sure no one was watching. Then he pulled out one of the bank withdrawal slips and practiced my signature. Over and over, comparing it to something else, probably my real signature on another document. Getting it just right. Then he went back inside, emerging minutes later with my purse. He drove away. 45 minutes later, he returned. The timestamps matched the withdrawal times on the bank statements. He forged your signature and went to your bank, George said, his voice hard with anger. Can you testify? Will you come to court? Absolutely. This is elder abuse, Angelita. This is criminal. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Real evidence. Video proof that couldn't be denied or dismissed. George spent the next hour making copies of all relevant footage. I left his house with a thumb drive containing evidence of Bradley's forgery, his threats, his manipulation. Finally, I had something concrete. I spent the next 2 days at the library, organizing everything. I created a timeline matching the video evidence to bank statements and court filings. I found information about presenting evidence in court without a lawyer. I wrote out my statement, practicing it until my hands stopped shaking when I read it aloud. I felt prepared. I felt strong. I could do this. Then on day 31, a process server arrived at the door. New papers. I signed for them with growing dread. Bradley had filed an emergency motion. The document claimed my condition had deteriorated rapidly over the past month. Crystal had submitted another report, this one even more damaging than the last. She claimed I'd been found wandering the house at night, disoriented, that I'd forgotten to bathe for days, that I'd been discovered talking to myself, having conversations with people who weren't there, that I'd become aggressive and refused to take prescribed medications. None of it was true, but it looked professional, detailed, convincing. Bradley was requesting an immediate psychiatric hold and permanent conservatorship. He argued that waiting for the scheduled hearing was too dangerous, that I posed a risk to myself. And because of this emergency motion, the final hearing had been moved up. Instead of 14 days away, it was now scheduled for Monday morning. 3 days from now. 72 hours to prepare everything. I felt panic rising but forced it down. I had evidence now. I had George's testimony. I had proof of the forgeries. I just needed to organize it all in time. That night, I barely slept. I worked at the library until it closed, then sat in a 24-hour diner with my laptop and papers spread across the booth, the waitress refilling my coffee every hour without comment. Saturday morning, I was back at the library when a woman approached me. She was in her mid-50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. "You're Angelita, aren't you? Gerald's wife?" I looked up, confused. "Yes? I'm Linda Sutton, Frank's ex-wife." The name Frank sent a jolt through me. Linda sat down across from me without waiting for permission. "I heard about your court case. Small town, people talk. I saw the public records. I recognized your name because Frank mentioned you after your husband died." She took a breath. "I need to tell you something. About Frank and Gerald's business. I don't understand. Frank was embezzling. From the business he shared with your husband. It went on for years. Gerald finally discovered it about 6 months before he died. He confronted Frank, threatened to go to the police. Frank begged for another chance. Said he'd pay everything back. Gerald gave him 6 months to make it right. My mind reeled. Gerald never told me any of this. He probably didn't want to worry you. But then Gerald died. And Frank saw an opportunity. He claimed Gerald owed him money, when really it was the other way around. He forced you to liquidate everything to pay debts that never existed. He stole from you, Angelita. He stole what was rightfully yours. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you say something 3 years ago?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know 3 years ago. I only found out during our divorce. I found old financial records Frank had hidden. By then, you'd disappeared. I tried to find you, but couldn't. When I saw Frank testify at your hearing, claiming Gerald was irresponsible and you were incompetent, I knew I had to speak up. He's lying. He's helping Bradley steal from you, just like he stole from Gerald. Do you have proof?" "I have everything. Business records showing the embezzlement. Emails between Frank and Gerald. Proof that the debts Frank claimed were fabricated. I even have text messages between Frank and Bradley from over a year ago. They've been planning this together," Frank told Bradley when you bought this house. Told him you had money now. They coordinated the whole thing. Frank gets a cut of whatever Bradley steals. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. "I'm willing to testify. I'm willing to provide all of this to the court. What Frank did to you was wrong. What he and Bradley are doing now is criminal. I won't be part of it anymore." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were bank records, emails, printouts of text messages, evidence of conspiracy, fraud, theft. Proof that Gerald hadn't been irresponsible, that I'd been victimized, that this wasn't about my incompetence but about Bradley's greed. Why would you do this? Frank's your ex-husband. That's exactly why. I know what he's capable of. I know how he lies and manipulates. I spent 22 years believing everything he told me. I won't let him destroy someone else's life the way he tried to destroy mine. I spent the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday organizing everything. George's video evidence, Linda's financial records, my timeline, my statement. I printed and copied everything 3 times, made binders with tabs, practiced my presentation. Sunday night, I returned to the villa late. Bradley and Crystal were in the living room, champagne glasses in hand, celebrating something. When they saw me, Bradley smiled. "Big day tomorrow, Mom. The hearing. Hope you're ready." "I'm ready." He laughed. "Sure you are. Don't worry. After tomorrow you won't have to worry about anything anymore. We'll take care of everything." I went to my room and set my alarm for 5 in the morning. The hearing was at 9. I needed time to get there early, to make sure everything was in order. This was my last chance. If I lost tomorrow, I lost everything. The villa, my savings, my independence, possibly even my freedom if Bradley convinced the judge I needed psychiatric care. But I wasn't the desperate, unprepared woman I'd been at the first hearing. I had allies now. I had evidence. I had proof. Tomorrow, I would fight back. I arrived at the courthouse at 7:45, dressed in my best outfit, carrying 3 file boxes of evidence. George pulled up minutes later, bringing copies of his video files on multiple drives in case of technical issues. Linda arrived at 8, looking nervous but determined. We sat on a bench in the hallway outside the courtroom, reviewing everything one last time. George assured me the videos were clear and undeniable. Linda walked me through her documents, explaining what each piece proved. I felt as prepared as I could be. At 8:45, Bradley arrived with Crystal and Paula Garrett. They walked past us without acknowledgement, but I saw Bradley's step falter when he noticed George and Linda. He didn't know who they were yet, but he sensed they were there for me. The courtroom opened at 9 exactly. Judge Hendricks took her seat, reviewed the case file, and looked up. "We're here for the final hearing on the conservatorship petition filed by Bradley Thornton. I understand there's been an emergency motion filed as well. Miss Garrett, you may proceed." Paula stood, polished and confident. She submitted Crystal's latest report, the one claiming I'd deteriorated dramatically. She argued that I was now a danger to myself and needed immediate intervention. She painted a picture of a woman spiraling into dementia, unable to care for herself, in desperate need of permanent legal protection. Then Judge Hendricks looked at me. "Mrs. Thornton, you're still representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." "I'd like to present evidence." "You may proceed." I stood, my hands steady despite my racing heart. "Your Honor, I have video evidence proving that my son has been committing fraud. I have financial records proving that the business partner who testified against me at the preliminary hearing was lying. I have proof of a conspiracy to steal my property and assets. And I have witnesses who can verify all of this." Paula objected immediately. "Your Honor, these are wild accusations. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we've documented." "I have proof," I said firmly. I began pulling out documents, organizing them on my table. "I'd like to call my first witness, George Patterson." George took the stand and was sworn in. I walked him through his testimony, keeping it clear and factual. He explained his security camera system, how it captured footage of my property. I submitted the video files as evidence. Judge Hendricks watched the footage on the courtroom monitor. Everyone watched. The recording of Bradley practicing my signature was damning. You could see him looking around furtively, trying to get my signature just right. Then taking my purse and leaving. "The timestamps match the bank withdrawals exactly," I explained. "Bradley forged my signature and stole $12,000 from my accounts. He then used my accusations against him as evidence that I was paranoid." Paula tried to cross-examine George, but there was nothing she could attack. The video was clear. The timestamps were undeniable. The evidence was irrefutable. Then I called Linda Sutton. She took the stand and explained her relationship to Frank. She presented the business records showing Frank's embezzlement from Gerald's company. The emails proving Gerald had discovered it. The fabricated debts Frank used to force me to liquidate everything. And you have evidence that Frank Sutton and Bradley Thornton coordinated this conservatorship case? Judge Hendricks asked. Yes, Your Honor. Linda submitted printouts of text messages between Frank and Bradley dating back over a year. Messages where Frank told Bradley about my house purchase. Messages planning when Bradley should make his move. Messages discussing how much they could extract and how they'd split it. The courtroom was silent except for the rustling of papers, as Judge Hendricks reviewed the evidence. I submitted my own statement, walking the judge through the timeline. Gerald's death. Frank forcing me into poverty through fraud. Bradley's abandonment. My recovery. Bradley's calculated return. The forged doctor evaluations. Crystal's false professional reports. The systematic financial abuse. Your Honor, I'm not incompetent. I'm the victim of coordinated elder abuse. My son saw that I'd rebuilt my life and decided to take everything I'd worked for. He used the legal system as a weapon against me. Paula tried to salvage her case, arguing that the evidence didn't disprove my mental decline, that even if Bradley had made mistakes, the core concern about my capacity remained valid. Judge Hendricks cut her off. Miss Garrett, I've heard enough. Mrs. Thornton, I want to be very clear. I've reviewed Dr. Price's cognitive evaluation report, which was submitted to the court yesterday. Did you know that your test results were actually excellent? Dr. Price noted that your cognitive function was entirely normal for your age. His concerns were based solely on the behavioral reports submitted by Crystal Thornton. I hadn't known. Dr. Price had never told me my results. Those reports, Judge Hendricks continued, her voice hard, now appear to be fabricated. This is one of the clearest cases of elder financial abuse I've encountered. Mrs. Thornton, I'm terminating the conservatorship immediately. All of your rights are restored. Relief flooded through me so powerfully, I had to grip the table for support. Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. Bradley Thornton, you are ordered to provide a complete accounting of every penny you've accessed from your mother's accounts. You will return all funds, plus damages, within 30 days. I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. You may face charges of fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Bradley's face had gone white. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order. You and Crystal Thornton are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Angelita Thornton. You have 24 hours to vacate her property. If you fail to comply, you will be arrested for trespassing. Judge Hendricks turned her attention to the documents about Frank and Timothy Grant. I'm also ordering investigations into Frank Sutton for fraud and perjury, into the 2 doctors who provided evaluations without examining Mrs. Thornton, and into attorney Timothy Grant for ethical violations. Crystal Thornton, you can expect a complaint to be filed with the Social Work Licensing Board. She looked at me directly. Mrs. Thornton, I apologize that the system failed to protect you initially. I hope this ruling provides some measure of justice. The gavel came down. It was over. Outside the courthouse, George hugged me. Linda hugged me. I stood in the sunshine, feeling years of weight lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or cry, so I did both. Bradley tried to approach me in the parking lot, but Linda stepped between us. Stay away from her, you heard the judge. 500 feet. He and Crystal drove away without a word. That afternoon, I returned to my villa with a police escort. Officer Williams, one of the officers who'd responded to my earlier call, supervised as Bradley and Crystal packed their belongings. They worked in angry silence, throwing things into boxes. Crystal cried. Bradley's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. By 5 p.m., they were gone. The house was a mess. They'd left garbage scattered around, furniture moved, walls still painted in colors I hated. But it was mine again. Legally, completely, irrevocably mine. I stood in the living room after the police left, looking at the disaster they'd created. Then I started cleaning. I moved furniture back. I threw out their garbage. I scrubbed and organized and reclaimed every inch of my home. 3 weeks after the hearing, the district attorney filed criminal charges. Bradley faced counts of elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Frank was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. The two doctors who'd signed evaluations without examining me turned out to be a document service that provided fake credentials for a fee. They faced fraud charges as well. Crystal lost her social work license after an ethics investigation. The licensing board determined she'd violated professional standards by conducting assessments under false pretenses and submitting fabricated reports. Timothy Grant faced bar disciplinary proceedings. His law license was suspended pending investigation. Bradley was arrested 2 days after charges were filed. I heard about it from Beth at work, who'd seen it in the news. The local paper ran the story. Son attempts to steal mother's home through fake conservatorship. The article detailed the whole scheme. Other families came forward with similar stories, naming Bradley and Frank as having approached them with financial planning services that were actually exploitation attempts. The court ordered Bradley to repay the $12,000 he'd stolen, plus $20,000 in damages. To cover it, he had to sell his condo in Portland. Crystal filed for divorce a week after his arrest. She moved out of state, leaving him to face the consequences alone. Frank was ordered to return the $70,000 he'd embezzled from Gerald's business. Linda helped me navigate the legal process to recover it. Some went to settling Gerald's actual estate. The rest came to me. After 3 years of believing we'd been broke, I discovered Gerald had been protecting assets that Frank had stolen. That money was rightfully mine. The financial recovery changed everything. I paid off my mortgage completely, set up a savings account with enough to feel secure for the first time in years. I could breathe again. But the real changes went deeper than money. George became one of my closest friends. We had coffee every Saturday morning on his porch, watching the neighborhood wake up, talking about everything and nothing. He'd lost his wife 5 years earlier and understood the particular loneliness of rebuilding life after loss. We filled that empty space for each other without needing to name it. Linda visited every few weeks. We'd have dinner together, sometimes cooking elaborate meals just for the joy of it, sometimes ordering pizza and eating it straight from the box while we talked. She was rebuilding her life too, recovering from decades with a man who'd lied about everything. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. 6 months after the hearing, I started a support group for elder abuse survivors. We met Tuesday evenings at the community center. I shared my story and listened to others share theirs. Some were still fighting. Some had already lost everything. Some were just beginning to realize what was happening to them. I helped where I could, connecting people with resources, explaining what to look for, encouraging them to trust their own judgment. The villa became truly mine again. I repainted the walls in warm colors, brought back my furniture from storage, hung my photographs where they belonged, planted a garden in the backyard, vegetables and flowers mixed together in chaotic abundance. Every morning I'd stand in my kitchen making coffee and feel genuine peace. I thought about Bradley sometimes, not often, and never for long. He was my son. I'd given birth to him, raised him, loved him with the fierce totality that mothers do. I'd sacrificed for him, protected him, believed in him, and he'd chosen greed over love. He'd looked at my struggle and triumph and decided it belonged to him. That was his choice, not my failure. I grieved for the son I'd thought I had, the one I'd imagined would care about my welfare, but that son had never existed. The real Bradley had abandoned me in my darkest moment and returned only when I had something worth taking. Accepting that truth hurt, but it also freed me. George said once that family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the people who show up when you need them, who witness your struggle and don't turn away, who celebrate your victories like they're their own. Linda and George were my family now, more than Bradley had ever been. One Saturday morning, about 8 months after the hearing, I was in my garden when George called over from his yard. "Angelita, come here. I want to show you something." I walked over, wiping dirt from my hands. He led me to his kitchen, where Linda was already waiting. They'd planned this together. "We've been talking," Linda said, "about starting something, a foundation maybe to help elder abuse survivors with legal costs. We'd need someone to run it, someone who understands what victims go through, someone who knows how to fight back." They were both looking at me. "We thought you'd be perfect," George added. "If you're interested." I looked at these two people who'd saved me when I couldn't save myself, who'd stood beside me in court, who'd become my chosen family, and I felt something I'd thought I'd lost forever. Hope for the future, purpose, possibility. "I'm interested," I said. We spent the rest of that morning planning. Linda had connections to lawyers willing to work pro bono. George knew grant writers who could help with funding. I had my story and my passion and my determination that what happened to me would happen to fewer people going forward. 3 months later, we officially launched the Angelita Thornton Elder Justice Foundation. We helped 12 families in the first year, connected them with legal aid, provided financial assistance for court costs, offered emotional support and guidance. 12 families who might have lost everything the way I almost did. 12 victories against a system that too often failed to protect its most vulnerable. On the 1-year anniversary of the hearing that changed everything, I invited George and Linda to my house for dinner. I cooked Gerald's favorite meal, the one I'd made for him every Sunday for 37 years. We ate on my back porch as the sun set, surrounded by my garden in full bloom. "To second chances," Linda said, raising her glass. "To chosen family," George added. "To fighting back," I said, "and winning." We drank to that. To survival. To justice. To the strange and beautiful ways life can break you down and build you back stronger. I'd learned so much through this nightmare. I'd learned that asking for help isn't weakness but wisdom, that vulnerability can be strength, that people you barely know can become family while blood relatives can become strangers. I'd learned my own capacity for resilience, for courage, for refusing to surrender even when everything seemed lost. I'd learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. Not the villa or the savings or the material things Bradley tried to steal. What mattered was autonomy, dignity, the right to live your own life on your own terms, the freedom to make your own choices and own your own story. I'd learned that even at 67, even after betrayal and poverty and heartbreak, you can start over. You can rebuild. You can find joy again. You can create something meaningful from the wreckage of what you lost. And I'd learned the most important lesson of all, that justice sometimes comes, but you have to fight for it. You have to stand up and speak your truth even when your voice shakes. You have to gather your evidence and present your case and refuse to be silenced. You have to believe you're worth fighting for, even when everyone around you is trying to convince you otherwise. The roses I'd been watering the day Bradley first arrived were blooming now, vibrant red against the white trellis. I'd planted them as symbols of new beginnings. They'd survived the chaos of the past year, the trampling of strangers moving through my garden, the neglect during the weeks when I was too broken to care for anything. They'd survived and flourished, just like me. George waved from his front porch the next morning, coffee cup in hand as always. I waved back. Linda's car was already in my driveway. We had a foundation meeting scheduled, 3 new cases to review, strategies to discuss. I went inside to make a fresh pot of coffee, smiling as I moved through my kitchen, my home, my life. I was free of Bradley and his manipulation, free of fear and desperation, free to live the life I'd earned through years of struggle and sacrifice and determination, free to help others find their own freedom. The sun streamed through my windows, warming the space I'd reclaimed inch by inch. I'd fought for this. I'd won. And no one could ever take it from me again. If you've ever felt trapped by family expectations or betrayed by someone you trusted, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you find your way through? What gave you the strength to keep going? Your experience might help someone else who's struggling right now. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories of triumph over adversity. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight back and reclaim your life. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve to live a life of dignity and freedom. Take care of yourselves, and remember that sometimes the family you choose is more powerful than the family you're born into.